Good morning, Year 7. Today we are going to focus on the character of Lady Macbeth. What you will notice in the beginning of this lesson, at least, is that we're going to cover some things that we already have seen about Lady Macbeth in our most recent lesson. I think this will be a good idea so that we can all make sure we're on the same page moving forward, so we've all covered the same thing. But also, with everything that's happened over the last few days, I don't know about you, but I think I would appreciate a recap to remember everything that we learnt last time. Please note on the slides, try to give an indication of how much time each activity should take. Please do not worry if it takes you longer. Just take the time to do the activities properly. So if you don't cover everything in the 40 minutes that you're supposed to spend on your English lesson today, then please don't worry. It's really important that you take those 10 minutes before your next lesson to have a break from the screen. Please email me if you're unsure of anything or if you want me to check anything as well. I've also attached a work booklet that you can use to go through each activity if it's easier for you. But feel free, if you don't have access to a printer or if you've run out of ink, I know I always run out of ink, then you can always just write down the quotations in your exercise book, okay, or on a piece of paper. Just make sure you keep everything together. Okay, so first activity, you can see we have some quotations from our last lesson on Lady Macbeth. I'd like you now to take 5 minutes to see if you can translate these key quotations into modern day English. What is she actually saying? If you were Lady Macbeth today and you were speaking in modern day English, how would you say these quotes? As a challenge, if this takes you not very long, then you can move on to really reflecting on what these quotes reveal about Lady Macbeth as a character, and that's really our focus on today's lesson. What are our first impressions of Lady Macbeth? So please pause the video now and spend 5 minutes on those activities. Okay, so you should have spent about 5 minutes. Do not worry if it took you a little longer. We are now going to go through those. So first of all, we've got this quotation, too full of the milk of human kindness. What is she actually saying? She's saying that she fears that Macbeth is too kind to kill. So what does that tell us? So this is the challenge part of the question if you got to this part. What does that tell us about Lady Macbeth as a character? It tells us that she initially, because remember this is our first impression of her, she initially appears to be quite an evil character who admires cruelty in others. Now let's think about that. She's concerned that her husband is too kind. Who worries about their husband being too kind or not being evil enough? That might suggest that she is evil herself. On to the next one, without the illness should attend it. So again, this is Lady Macbeth fearing that Macbeth is too good and that it will hold him back in furthering his career. So she mentions that she knows he has ambition, but maybe he's just not evil enough. What does that tell us about Lady Macbeth? She's clearly very ambitious. She does not want Macbeth's good morals to get in the way of their social progression, because remember, if Macbeth becomes king, she will become queen. So we learn that she's very ambitious and she believes to really succeed in life that you should be willing to do anything, even murder, to get where you need to get to. Okay, next one. I may pour my spirits in thine ear. So here, Lady Macbeth, this is when she's saying, hurry, come home, okay? She wants to share her inner thoughts with Macbeth, okay? She wants to speak to him secretly. What does that tell us about her? She actually has, at this point in the play, a close relationship with her husband because she wants to confide in him her darkest thoughts. And that's really important because we're potentially going to see that change by the end of the play. But at this stage, they actually seem to be very close. And then finally, chastise with the valour of my tongue. Lady Macbeth wants to persuade Macbeth to kill King Duncan. So what do we learn? That she's manipulative and knows she has influence over her husband. And we're going to see that later on, that she can be very, very persuasive. Okay. Remember, it's okay to pause this video if you need time to check your answers and add to it. Maybe there was something that you left out that you think you could add to your notes. So please take the time to do that if you need to. Moving on. So now with the same quotes, we need to make sure that we can identify techniques and explain the effect of those techniques. So I'm going to give you another 5 minutes now to read through on the right hand side of your screen some techniques that are in the quotes we've just looked at, but they're all jumbled up. I'd like you to draw arrows to link those quotations with the correct technique. So give yourselves 5 minutes now. Okay, hopefully you've given yourself 5 minutes. It's okay if it took a little longer. So first of all, too full of the milk of human kindness. What technique is being used here? Symbolism. This symbolises the purity of Macbeth. So the symbol really is the use of the word milk. Okay, this is the symbol of purity. Think about how white it is. Also think about how it links to childhood as well, and that's quite concerning, isn't it? Because she doesn't want him to be pure. Okay, without the illness should attend it. This is a synonym for evil, highlighting what Lady Macbeth thinks is important for Macbeth to be. So when she says illness, this is really another word for evil. I may pour my spirits in thine ear. This foreshadows that Lady Macbeth may have a connection with the supernatural, especially this word spirits, the fact that she refers to speaking to Macbeth like pouring spirits in his ear suggests that she thinks she might have kind of some supernatural connection and influence over Macbeth. And then finally, chastise with the valour of my tongue. The use of diction depicts Lady Macbeth as authoritative and brave. Diction is just a fancy word for language. And really we're looking at the word chastise, which means really to tell him off, like a mother might tell a child off, and valour meaning brave. And so here we're starting to see that she's quite authoritative in this relationship, and she at least considers herself as brave. We might argue that's quite ironic, because she's she'll be telling Macbeth to kill King Duncan. She's not willing to do it herself. So you might argue that this is quite ironic or hypocritical of her to say. All right, now linking to context. So it's really important when we study Shakespearean plays that we consider the time it was written and the audience it was written for. So the way we might respond to things that we see on stage now written by Shakespeare could be very, very different to the way that the original audience would see the themes and the characters on stage. So it's important we know about women of that time and how they were expected to be. So we're going to read through the facts together, and then I want you to write a list of ways that Lady Macbeth's character is very different to the way women were expected to behave in the Jacobean era. So really think about what we've learnt so far. So we're only focusing really on those 4 quotes, okay? But how, in just those 4 quotes, do we see that Lady Macbeth is very, very different to the stereotypical woman of that time? So firstly, women were expected to be subordinate to men. In other words, they were less than men. They were seen as not as important. If they were unmarried, for example, they should be obedient to their fathers. If they were married, they should be obedient to their husbands. Their primary role was to be mothers and caregivers. Okay, that was the expectation. That was all that women were supposed to be. They had no other opportunities. They shouldn't. They certainly weren't the breadwinners of the family. They were expected to be very religious and pure. Okay, we expect women of that time to be non-violent and to be very pious. And lastly, the new King of England, who was James I at the time, strongly believed in witchcraft. It was believed by many that witches were women controlled by the devil. To have dealings with witches would have been seen as a great crime. So I know when we look at the witches on stage, we might think it's all very silly and strange, but at the time, actually, the audience would take that very seriously. And all the things that we hear that the witches can do or have done, the audience, or most of the audience, would genuinely believe that there were witches out there with those kind of powers. So now, taking all that into consideration, write a list of how Lady Macbeth differs to the stereotypical woman of that time. Pause the video now. Okay, hopefully you've given yourself enough time to write that list. Here are some things that you may have written. Maybe you found more ideas than I did. But if there's anything on here that you didn't write down, please add it to your list. So ways that Lady Macbeth is different to women in the Jacobean era. She believes she can manipulate her husband, whereas women were expected to be subservient to men, that should say, not than men, just notice that. She wants her husband to be more immoral, whereas women were expected to be pure. Her language suggests she could be connected to witchcraft. This would have been seen as a great crime at the time. So have a look, see if you've got those main ideas. We're starting to notice that Lady Macbeth, especially for this time, would be a very interesting character to the audience. They wouldn't have seen women like this in their day-to-day lives. Okay, moving on. And finally, we're going to put all our learning into action. So this should take about 10 minutes. Eventually, I would like you to be able to write a paragraph like this on your own. For now, I've started one. I'd like you to think about how you would finish it. Now, there's not going to be one correct answer to this. So when we do go through the answers, those are just suggestions, so keep that in mind. But just a reminder of how we organise our piece paragraphs. You should always start with a point. So let's imagine we are talking. I should have put the question, sorry. The question is, how is Lady Macbeth initially presented? And that's in your workbook, so you can always have that in front of you. So you might argue that Lady Macbeth is initially presented as, you tell me, what have we seen so far? You have to think, however, about the quote that I've chosen. This is shown when she worries that Macbeth is too full of. How do you finish that quote? Have a look through your notes. And then it talks about some analysis. So remember, we've supported our idea. Now we need to break down that quote and talk about the meaning behind it. So what is milk a symbol of? What does that highlight about Lady Macbeth and what she doesn't want Macbeth to be? But what does this show us about Lady Macbeth? This is all in your notes. So have a look through and make sure you complete your analysis as fully as you can. And then you should link it to context. You want to show your appreciation for the time it was written and how the audience at the time would feel. So Lady Macbeth's character is in contrast to the expectations of women during the Jacobean era because they're expected to be, and then you can finish that, and then think about how the audience would feel towards Lady Macbeth. So pause the video now, give yourselves about 10 minutes to complete that activity. Okay, hopefully you gave yourself enough time. And if you're running out of time and it's getting close to 40 minutes, this is the time to step away. You can always pick this up in the next lesson, okay? Please go at the most appropriate pace for you. Okay, So this is, on the next slide I am going to show you, gives you an idea of how you could have answered this. Please, if you have written something similar, that's absolutely fine. I don't expect this to be word for word exactly the same. It's really if you've got kind of the same idea. So let's have a look. So you may have said something like, Lady Macbeth is presented as evil. So you want to show something about her morality, okay? And linking this to, she's obviously a bad character at this stage. This is something that would be exactly the same. The full quote is too full of the milk of human kindness. Milk is a symbol of purity. You may have said something like goodness as well. And highlights that Lady Macbeth does not want Macbeth to be good, but she would rather he be more wicked. So you want to show here, it's okay if you use different language, something about what she doesn't want him to be, which is, a good moral character, and then a word linking to something like wicked. This emphasises that Lady Macbeth is a character who admires immorality in others over goodness. So you want to get that over, okay? From this quote, we learn that she actually praises evil in others. So make sure you have that in that. And remember, pause this at any moment if you think you need to add to your analysis. How do we link it to context? Well, she's very different to the expectations of women during this time because they were expected to be highly religious and pure. You may have said something like, they were expected to be good, they were expected to be non-violent, anything like that would be absolutely fine. And this would make the audience feel distrustful of Lady Macbeth, as she appears to be an immoral character who respects badness in others. So again, something along those lines, okay? We're becoming quite nervous and anxious about this character. She's obviously not showing very positive attributes. Someone who definitely prefers evil ways versus good. So have a look through, make sure you add any information that you think you may have missed, and of course feel free to email me if you are unsure of anything. And that's the end of the lesson.